Hi, it's Dre Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. Today we discuss how can I beat inflation in retirement. When it comes to inflation, it's one of those silent killers that we don't talk about often enough. Now, it's actually been talked about a little bit more often recently because inflation in the past few years has gone up to double digits sometimes, where inflation has been as high as it has ever been in the past 40 years. So a lot of people are looking back and saying, well, wait a minute, how long is inflation going to last? And for those that don't know, inflation is a very fancy way of saying that the amount of money that you need to live your exact same lifestyle is actually costing more. And another way to think of it is if you thought of, let's say, milk, because I buy milk, my kids love cereal, they drink milk a lot. And I bought milk when they were younger and it was like $2 a gallon. And then it went up to $3 a gallon and $4 a gallon. And the last time I went, a gallon of organic milk down here in Florida was like $9. And I'm sitting here like, well, wait a minute. That's like a 400% increase in just over a few years. Now, you may look at gas and other things that you have to purchase. And when you think about your retirement, it's not just 5 years, it's not even just 10 years. Your retirement is really close to 20, 30, 40 years, where there are people who are going to be as retired as long as they were actively working in the workforce. And if that is the case, and inflation stays about what it averages, which is normally like 2 to 3%, and we can argue about that number because they do a weird way of counting it, where they'll say, okay, well, the things that we count in inflation, and they'll list the things off and you'll look and you'll be like, okay, well, what's not counting? They'll be like, well, food and energy. And but well, wait a minute, you don't count food and energy in your calculation for inflation? And they'll be like, well, it's sort of complicated. And you'll find that the government does that a lot, where they're very funny with the math and how they count things. Then you'll be sitting there like, well, what do these numbers mean? And so we're just going to get really to the nuts and bolts of inflation, which is just the idea that if you just take the government at their word, which I know was funny even saying that out loud, but if you take them at their word, they say inflation is about 3% every single year, which means that about every 17 to 20 years, your purchasing power cuts in half. In half. And what that means is if you had $1 million saved for retirement and you had a 4% withdrawal strategy, so you're living off of that $40,000 and then you had your Social Security and that was generating another $20,000. And so you're just minding your own business with $60,000 a year. Well, you would find out in 20 years that you would actually need $120,000 to live the exact same lifestyle. The exact same lifestyle. And because inflation is a real deal and we have to be able to maintain our purchasing power so that we can afford the same lifestyle where we can still fill up our gas tank and we can still go on those trips and we can still take the walks and enjoy our time with our family, then we have to be investing in assets that actually outpace inflation, which, as we just said, if it's averaging 2 to 3%, that means over the long term that my investments need to outpace that. I cannot be investing my money, or at least we would say I can't invest all of my money in assets that don't keep up with inflation. There are 7 streams of income that I always talk about that the IRS says that they recognize. And interest income is basically going to be the one that we're unable to keep up with inflation. That's just how it generally works. Now, there is times like today where interest income is really good, where you can get 4, 5, 6% even. And that's basically because the interest rates have gone up significantly because the Fed is trying to decrease inflation. Inflation is tied to a couple things, and the number one is that there's a lot of people with jobs making a whole lot of money. And when people make a whole lot of money, there's 2 issues with that as far as inflation is concerned. Number one is we are paying people more than what we used to. And because your labor is your highest cost in the company, you then pass off as much of that cost as you can to your consumer. So as you increase people's wages because you're at full employment, so no one's willing to leave their job unless you're going to give them a 10, 20% increase over where their current job is. And what we'll often do when we have more money in our bank account is we're going to go spend it because that's generally the way that Americans feel. We are the number one consumer of most things and we want to buy all of the new fancy gadgets. And so when we have more money, we're going to say, you know what? I'm going to treat myself to something very nice. I have been being very responsible, but I just want to reward myself for the hard work of being able to get this 10 to 20% increase. So I'm going to pay myself more. Which you and I would say, okay, well, I can appreciate that because if you felt like you earned something, you want to reward yourself. Well, the problem then becomes twofold, where the first part we've already talked about, which is the idea that as a company, I am paying people more. So I have a higher cost to produce my goods. So I'm going to charge a little bit more. That causes inflation. Number two is because everyone has more money, they end up buying all the items off the shelf. And if you're a business owner and you found out that all of your shelves were empty, as soon as you get your inventory back up, you're most likely going to raise your prices because you're sitting there saying, okay, if I'm selling out and there are more people who would have bought the item, then the normal economic decision that we would all do in that situation is, okay, I need to raise my prices. If I can only sell 100 of these items and there was 200 people willing to buy it at $10, well, if I raise it to $15, maybe that would match the inventory that I have, where there's only 100 people who want to buy it at $15 and I'm only making 100 items. And so that is just the other half of it. These two events cause inflation. So inflation is tied to economic growth, usually right after a recession of some kind. Once we came out of COVID, we were in a little mini recession. And then everybody said, okay, new jobs, new money, new income, government spending, where they gave us a whole bunch of stimulus checks. And everybody was sitting in their house. And then you have the logistic nightmare where the shelves were empty. So as soon as all of that got cleared up, everybody went and spent their money. So now we'll take a step back and we'll say, okay, Dre, how often does that happen? Well, we have these economic cycles every 5 to 10 years. And if you have a recession every 5 to 10 years, then it means that you will probably have at least 4 recessions in your retirement, which means you have to have a plan in place to make sure your money lasts as long as you do, and maybe even a little bit longer if we do our job right. So for you to beat inflation in your retirement, there's 3 things that you need to do. Number one is you want to diversify your investments. Now, when we talk about diversifying your investments, you know that there's basically 3 asset classes. We're either going to generate our income from the stock market, business ventures, or real estate. You will then decide within those 3 asset classes which one makes the most sense for you. I often tell people a great place to start is the stock market. It has the lowest barrier of entry and you can't lose more than the money that you put in. When it comes to real estate and business ventures, because you're leveraging your money, they're great places to exponentially grow your money, but you also have the opportunity to lose even more than you invested. For example, you know that you only have to buy a house with 20% down, but if something happens to that home, you owe 100% of that mortgage. Which means for most people, you either already have to have that wisdom in the background to help you make those sound decisions, or you have to hire a professional who has the wisdom and experience of managing those assets, and then they can help you to be able to generate that income so that you can have peace of mind in retirement. Now, when you look at these asset classes, normally business ventures, they outpace inflation because there's a couple things. One is we just talked about it. When my prices are increasing, then I'm going to be generating more revenue as a company. And if I'm generating more revenue as a company, normally my stock price is going to reflect that. So it's going to go up as well. And as a result, inflation is normally priced into the stock market, which is a very fancy way of saying that these businesses are going to raise their prices with inflation, at least the very large ones. There are some smaller businesses that simply cannot increase their prices. So we would be looking at things like market share to determine what makes the most sense in our investment portfolio. And when you look at real estate, you find that those tend to outpace inflation as well. That if inflation is normally going up 2 to 3% every year, your price of your home is going up higher than that, generally speaking. Obviously, there's times that the market goes down, but generally speaking, you will find that the value of your home is outpacing inflation. So investing in real estate tends to also be a great place to invest your money. The beauty of diversifying your investments, and I'll put a link to another video where I go over some diversification strategies in retirement, is you're able to hedge against some of these risks while still generating enough income to have a healthy and wealthy retirement. Now, if you're someone who wants to be a little more conservative with your investments, where you don't necessarily want to be investing in these higher risk assets, then you would be someone who want to look at a couple things. Number one is you would look at Treasury inflation protected security, or TIPS for short. And all these are government debt where it's already tied to inflation. So as inflation goes up, the return that you get in these TIPS goes up as well. And so that is a nice inflation hedge for you. Another opportunity will be investing in annuities where you can generate an income stream and then you add a rider to your annuity, which is an inflation rider or a cost of living adjustment rider. Now, you do pay a little bit more for these riders to be added to your annuities, but as a result, every time inflation goes up, then your annuity payment goes up as well. So in the example that we gave earlier in this video where you have $40,000 being generated from your investments, if you have $40,000 being generated from your annuity every single year, it would actually go up with inflation if you have the cost of living adjustment rider added to it. Now, naturally, Social Security is also something that goes up with inflation. Now, it doesn't go up one for one. They sort of review it and they look at it, and sometimes it feels like inflation is 8%, but you'll see that it goes up with inflation. Maybe not always that one for one feeling that we're looking for, but even when you look at inflation where it was about 10% over the last couple of years, where we're at 40 years highs, I saw that the cost of living adjustment in Social Security was close to 8%. And so you can see that they do try to keep up with inflation. Now, it doesn't always happen, as I mentioned, but generally speaking, it's also another way that you can generate an income that goes up with inflation. Another relatively safe investment would be dividend paying stocks. We're not only going to be investing in things like staple companies, which is a very fancy way of saying that these are things that people have to spend money on no matter what the economic climate is. We always have to buy toilet paper. We have to always buy food. And so if I'm able to invest in these staple companies, then they will be okay whether we're in a recession or times of economic growth. Because these are generally going to be very large, safe investments, these companies aren't really going to go anywhere. That if you had to think of Procter and Gamble or AT&T or Apple disappearing, we're probably in a really bad economic situation and we may all be in trouble. Because generally speaking, these companies are going to be the ones that will be there through thick and thin. A lot of the smaller companies, they may go away because they don't have enough cash or they don't have the credit to get access to other things, or people stop buying their product because of the things that are going on. But for these staple companies, they are a staple for a reason, as in they are literally a foundational piece in our economy. And as a result, they normally are going to be there and they're normally going to be paying these dividends. And those that don't know, a dividend is a very fancy way of saying that a company is generating a certain amount of profits. And because you are also a owner in the company, because you own stock in the company, they share in the profits with you. They say, we already have a lot of market share. We don't have any new products that we're going to generate. So we're just going to go ahead and give the excess revenue to you. And you and I will sit there and say, this is phenomenal. I love this. And I'll put another video together where I go through some of those dividend investing strategies. So these are your conservative options where you're going to sit there and say, you know what, Dre, I can appreciate what you're saying, but I'm really focused on preservation. I don't want to lose any of my money. I understand that I have to have a little bit of risk in my portfolio, but I really want to lean more on the safer options. These will be those options. Now, if you're on the other end and you're saying, Dre, I have a very healthy risk appetite. I want to know what opportunities are there to outpace inflation that really outpace inflation. These are generally going to be in what we call alternative investments. So alternative investments could be commodities. We're investing in like gold, oil, and weed and things like that. It could be private equity firms or hedge funds. You could be an art collector or a baseball card collector. You can collect any sort of rare items that you're going to hold on to and you expect to be able to sell it in the future for exponentially more than inflation has been. There are those that want to dabble in cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. There are a lot of alternative investments that are pretty high risk, relatively volatile, which is a very fancy way of saying the numbers go up and down a lot. And if you don't have the stomach for that roller coaster ride, then you may find yourself selling when it goes down, and literally the next week it's going to go up a lot. And as a result, most people aren't able to invest in these alternative assets. It takes a very sophisticated investment strategy because we're thinking, I need more money. I don't have enough for retirement. So, Dre, what can I invest in for a home run? And you're going to sit there and look at Bitcoin and hedge funds and gold and oil and wheat and all these other alternative assets. And you're going to think, okay, these are going up a lot. I'm going to invest in these, get a 40% return, and then I'm going to have rainbows and Skittles in my retirement. I'll have all the money I need. But it's actually the opposite. If you're going to invest in these alternative assets, you generally have to have a very safe amount of money to gamble with. Because in a lot of ways, that's what we're doing with alternative investing. We're gambling. We're not 100% sure. Sure, we're able to put some strategies together, but it's very, very difficult to be able to put the right plan together for a long-term strategy to be successful. As a result, you often have to have a certain amount of money that you're okay losing, which is just like if you went to a casino, you would say, okay, this is the amount of money that I'm going to gamble with. If I win, great. If I lose, fine. Because I didn't invest the money that I needed to pay my mortgage or I needed to keep my lights on. And that's how I often talk to people. We have to have a certain amount of money, a certain investment strategy that makes sense long term so that you can have that financial freedom that you want in retirement and even possibly that generational wealth that you are looking to build for the future. And once you have all those boxes checked off, then we can talk about these alternative strategies. Then we can talk about hitting these home runs on the side because we already have everything taken care of. We've already built a financial fortress around ourselves and our family. Most people are saying the opposite, or most people are saying, okay, I don't have enough money. How can I exponentially grow my money? The second way to beat inflation in retirement has to do with your healthcare expenses. You and I know that healthcare is one of those expenses that seems to go up a lot every single year, where we look at a healthcare insurance and we're sitting there like, dang, man, it seems like my healthcare goes up 10% every single year. And sometimes it really does. So when it comes to retirement, the numbers show that an average couple can expect to spend $300,000 in retirement on healthcare expenses. Now, that is over the life of your retirement, but that is a large chunk of money that we have to already be prepared for. So there are a couple things that we can do to beat inflation when it comes to our healthcare expenses. Number one, as we already talked about it, I need to invest in assets that are going to outpace inflation. But one that is specific to your healthcare expenses is your health savings account. Now, to qualify for it, you have to already have a high deductible plan. But if you don't have a high deductible plan, then you don't have the opportunity to put money in a health savings account. But if you do have a high deductible plan and you are able to put your money in your health savings account, you can put $4,100 a year inside of that account, and then you're able to deduct that money from your income in your current taxes. So that's the one benefit. And that money grows tax-free inside of your HSA account, which is the second benefit. And number three is as long as you spend that money on qualified medical expenses in retirement, you're able to take that money out tax-free as well. So you put the money in and got a tax deduction, the money grew without you paying taxes on it, and then you took the money out without paying taxes on it. That is the triple benefit, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I do have another video where I go into a little bit more detail when we talked about a health savings account, and I'll put a link to it for you. But if you are able to take advantage of your health savings account, then that normally is a great avenue for you to explore. The next thing is about 7 out of 10 people 65 and older will have at least one long-term care episode. And a long-term care episode is a very fancy way of saying that we're unable to do one of the normal operations of just being a healthy individual. That could be bathing, walking, going to the bathroom, eating, right? It's the bare essentials that we need to be able to function as a human being. And because 7 out of 10 people are estimated to have at least one long-term care episode, that cost tends to be somewhere around $40,000 every single year. And on average, it lasts for about 3 years. So we have two approaches when it comes to dealing with long-term care. Number one is we can explore long-term care insurance, and I'll put a link to another video where I go through that. Now, if you're someone who's interested in long-term care insurance, you normally want to get it before you turn 60 years old. Most insurance companies have the same numbers that I have and the same numbers that you have, where it says that once people hit 65, then there's a high likelihood that they're going to have a long-term care episode. And so as a result, insurance companies tend to make it really hard to qualify when you're 60, or if you qualify, they make it pretty expensive, the premium. But on average, you can expect to pay about $120, $150 a month if you get it somewhere between like 55 and 60. And then you're able to decide, how do you want to design it? Do you want it to cover the average of the 3 years on the $40,000 a year? So you get $120,000 of long-term care coverage? Because you can. Now, to deal with inflation, you can also add a cost of living rider to your long-term care. So that amount goes up each year with inflation. So that way, if $120,000 was good in 2024, but in 2034, it's actually more like $200,000. Well, if you were able to have that cost of living adjustment in your long-term care insurance, it's going to go up with that, and you'll have the exact same coverage purchasing power that you had in 2024. Now, if you were looking at alternatives to long-term care, I actually made a whole video on that, and I'll put a link to that as well for you. But then you're going to say, okay, I have to be able to have this money set aside. So whether I use the health savings account strategy that Dre just talked about, or whether I put the money in other assets because I need it to grow a little bit more than that, then we can do a variety of these strategies to make sure that you're taken care of. And the third way to beat inflation in retirement has to do with maintaining our lifestyle. So when it comes to you being happy in retirement, you guys already know that it's tied to how you spend your time. You have to spend your time on things that bring you pleasure or things that bring you purpose. So once you outline the things, and I normally tell people, write down 50 goals that you have, write down 50 beautiful things that you want to do. And the reason I have you go up to 50 is because normally when we talk about the first 5, it's normally the squeaky wheel, things that are stressing and bothering us. Once you get over 30, we're really thinking hard about the things that we genuinely want to get out of this life, where we want to see people and do things. We want to go back to school, or we want to travel, we want to read a book, we want to volunteer. Whatever it is you want to do, you're really able to get in touch with yourself, and you're able to start putting these things on a list. And then as you check the things off your list, you don't really allow the list to go under 40. What you do is you just keep adding things onto that list. And then you have to say, okay, well, I know what I want to do with my time, Dre. How do I fund it? Well, with this one, we always start with our investments. I need to make sure that my investments are outpacing inflation. We've gone over which assets you can invest in to be able to achieve that. But then the other thing that you want to do, and I'll put a link to another video, is there's lots of strategies to be able to make sure I have a great retirement lifestyle. Now, if I want to travel, then maybe I need to plan a year or 2 years, 3 years ahead of time. And you may say, well, Dre, that's crazy. Well, I would just say it's your life. It's your retirement. We spend a lot of time preparing to buy a TV. We spend a lot of time looking on Amazon, reading reviews before we do these different things. Why not spend that much time planning for your retirement? If you're able to be a year out, then you find that the cost is a lot lower for a lot of these different events. And you're able to lock in a lower rate today, or even if inflation happens in a year, you're always paying the lower rate because inflation is going to be in the future. And if you're able to lock in a certain number of trips, because you'll be surprised with cruises and airlines how far ahead they let you book out these trips. And if you're able to do that, then you're able to save a ton of money, because nobody expects people to be booking a year or 2 years out. And so as a result, they normally are going to give you a much lower rate because you're taking on some of the risk with them. Nobody knows if you're going to be able to take that trip. You may have a wedding or a baby shower. Who knows what you might be doing? But because you're sharing that risk with them, they don't know what they're doing either. They don't know if their cruise is going to be empty or full. They don't know if their hotel is going to be empty or full, if their venue is going to be full or anyone's going to be wanting to go there, if they're going to be a 5-star or a 3-star hotel. It's like nobody knows what's going to happen in the future, but because you're planning that far ahead, you get to take advantage of some of that. We're able to lower some of these expenses, and then you're able to continue checking things off your list. You just have to be relatively creative when it comes to your retirement. We want to be able to spend our time doing all these amazing things, whether you want to sit outside on the back porch, whether you want to go to the park and have a picnic, whether you want to watch the sunset at the beach. There are some things that we can do that are relatively free, but then there's other things that we want to do that has a pretty significant cost tied to it. Generally speaking, that's going to lower the price and help us in this ability to beat inflation in retirement. And that'll do it for today. You have everything that you need to overcome inflation and secure a wealthy retirement. You know that you need to diversify your investments, plan for the increasing healthcare costs, and make sure that you have an income that is outpacing and growing with inflation. If you do those three things, then you're going to be sitting pretty when it comes to beating inflation and enjoying your retirement. I know that you can do it. I believe in you. If you take these steps today, I'm very confident that you'll have peace of mind and confidence going into retirement. Thank you for watching. If you found value in this video, I simply ask for you to like and subscribe so you can continue receiving valuable insights on how to create your own wealthy retirement system so that you can worry less and live more. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy life.